Spirits of Christmas. There we go. All right, everybody. Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube. Hello, TikTok. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I see you guys coming in the chat room and TikTok. Unfortunately, I can't read what you're writing because it's so small from where I'm sitting. But know that I know you're there. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. Hello, YouTube. Hello, Facebook. I'm going to be your host for the next hour, and I'm going to be reading the I'm going to be reading from a scary Christmas book today, The Spirits of Christmas, the Darkness of the Holiday. So I'm looking for, let me make a lighting adjustment here real quick. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to make a couple lighting adjustments and we're off and running. What I'd like to do is apologize for my camera right off bat. We had some camera issues yesterday with the system because we're just trying this new camera system over here for YouTube and Facebook. So if something goes wrong with the camera, I'll be back in to flip it back on. We had problems during yesterday's show. Hopefully we don't have those problems. Anyway, I'm going to be reading from The Darkside of the Holidays. The Spirits of Christmas, The Darkside of the Holidays by Sylvia Shuts. It's a great book. We read from it last year. We're real excited to read from it again. Have permission to do it. And I'll be reading for about an hour. It's like 5:10 Pacific right now. So I'll be reading for about an hour. Thank you. Double tap that screen. Let's see how many likes we can get tonight for this. Okay? I won't be paying, don't expect me to pay a lot of attention to what's going on the screens here because I will be reading. But, get yourself some hot cocoa or some cider or something and dim those lights and kick back and enjoy it, Just sit back and enjoy me reading a book to you. And this is a really spooky book, and I'm going to warn everybody in TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube that there might be some offensive stuff in here. Someone might take offensive. Please don't take it offensively. It's a book, okay? I'll do my best to clean it up as I go, but do not turn me into the internet police, okay? That's all I ask. I'll do my best, okay? There's no psychic readings tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific, but I am reading from this book. A different type of reading, okay? Sylvia Shuts is an award-winning author. She's written quite a few books. She's going to be on this show on Thursday afternoon as well with another book she's written. So we're excited to have her again, and she's excited to be here. So without further ado, I will be reading the book, and double tap that screen, everybody, and I think you're going to like it. It's spooky as hell, and it gets kind of depressing after a while, and some of the stuff that's in here. But there are some very interesting stories. And like I said, I'm going to be monitoring what's going on over on my computer screen because I did have some interesting internet issues, not so much internet issues, but camera issues the other day. Okay, so here we go. This is The Spirits of Christmas, The Darkness of the Holidays. And away we go. And please remember that I'm just looking at this. All right, so my monitors are in the chat room, so that works perfectly. I cannot see the comments coming up, so I'm going to leave it to my moderators to take care of the chat room. And if any gifts come through, you guys are welcome to gift. Not required to, but it'd be nice if you did. They will take care of the thank yous, and I'll thank you guys at the end of the show because I can't see the gifts coming up over there, okay? All right, so let's hope everything holds up on my laptop, and here we go. Again, The Spirits of Christmas, The Darkness of the Holidays. Here's the prologue by Stephen Lancaster. When you ask people to describe the scariest time of year, typically they quickly return with Halloween or October in general as the answer. I always found that to be a comical association. To me, Halloween is nothing but a novelty. In reality, it's no different than the months before it. You see these people every day. You know who they are. The only difference is for one night, everybody parades around in a masquerade of ghouls and goblins. We know it's fake, and the only strangeness in your home are the decorations you place there. The month of October spins thoughts of cemeteries in my head. That is a faultless comparison. How can you be afraid of a cemetery when everybody there is dead? How can you be afraid of Halloween when the guy in the mask is a neighbor or your friend? Statistically, more people find themselves depressed, unalive themselves, and are filled with a plethora of dark emotions around the holidays. I'm referring to Christmas and the bleak secrets kept within the month of December. There are two different people reading this. The first is nodding in agreement because they have been or are currently there. They have been to that place the best pill in the world can't pull them from. The other person is shaking their head in disagreement because Christmas to them has been nothing but joy and happiness. I'm contented by that. But there is a truth most people choose to ignore. There is a truth hiding behind all the tinsel and the carols and the red-nosed reindeer. The holidays can be the darkest of nights, despite the overabundance of lights. Have you ever really focused on the lyrical content of many Christmas songs? You may accept the arrangements revolving around joy, but in all actuality, the words sung speak of sorrow, conflict, dying, loneliness, impoverishment, and even monsters. This reminds me of the modern-day renditions of classic fairy tales and how dark, offensive, and disturbing the source content really was. Before becoming... Let me make sure my mic's on over here, you guys. Okay. That would suck if I had no mic. Okay. Offensive and disturbing the source content really was before becoming sugar-coated into edible entertainment for our children. What about the big red guy himself, Santa Claus? Research into his origin reveals Dutch descent, often referring to him as Sinterklaas. It is believed that pieces of the Father Christmas mythology contain elements of Wodan, a Germanic god. The midwinter pagan event of Christmas was related to a ghostly procession referred to as Wild Hunt. To put it simply, the Wild Hunt signified a group of frantically passing you by as if they were chasing something unseen. Of course you don't hear much about that, do you? It should go without saying that we as adults teach happiness, anticipation, and excitement to our children through bold-faced lies. We make them believe in something that, beyond a shadow of a doubt, doesn't exist. Suddenly, all of that positive energy you typically correlate with Christmas doesn't appear so positive. But how does all of that measure up to the bumps in the night and the monsters under the bed? Look at it as if you were operating a car. The more gas you give it, the power increases, the speed accelerates, and the more impact it can make. Spirits need energy to thrive. They need a powerful energy. Mechanical devices, weather, and human emotion are at the top of that list. Whether it's a refrigerator with its high energy fields, a storm with ionic energy, or a person in deep love, or a victim of tragedy, spirits can, do, and will use that energy for whatever purpose they wish, good or bad. In the paranormal research world, lower temperatures result in higher fields of iconic energy. Strong storms have the same impact. Ionic, I'm sorry, I keep saying iconic, it's ionic. Dumb. Ionic energy can alter not only human behavior, but supernatural activity greatly. Similar to how we observe levels of EMF to determine the potential level of a spiritual encounter. Ionic energy should be viewed no differently. They both act as a form of location and tools of measurement. Where is the spirit, and how powerful is it? Measuring ionic energy and electromagnetic fields answers both of those questions. This isn't relevant in all the regions. Hang on. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm on a free plan over here testing out EV Mux. So it's giving me that little message saying the recording stopped. I apologize. Where am I? But in many areas, snowfall, ice, and cold weather are the norm. One rarely pictures Christmas having a desert backdrop. I think most readers would agree, especially those who have a background in paranormal research. The majority of the ethereal convergence is at its apex and most predictable during winter months and catastrophic storms. However, are Mother Earth's natural occurrences all to blame for fueling paranormal experiences, or are they just a piece of a much larger puzzle? From my first paranormal experience as a child to recent occurrences that left me dumbfounded, they all came to me around the holidays. And there was severe emotional sensitivity taking place. Some of the strongest, damaging, and intimidating entities I have ever experienced didn't happen at the beach or on Independence Day or Easter. They happened in my home, where a jolly man in a red suit was supposed to make an appearance. Instead, something much darker did. Stephen Lancaster is both a leading innovator and expert in the field of paranormal research. His exploration into the supernatural spans nearly 30 years. He authored the best-selling book, The True Case Files of a Paranormal Investigator, The Accounts of the Paranormal. That was in 2012. He is also the author of Dark Spirits, A Man Terrorized by the Supernatural, 2016, and Norman, the Doll That Needed to be Locked Away, 2018. So here's the introduction, you guys. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and it's loaded with ghosts. They say the veil between this world and the next is thinnest at Halloween. But there's still plenty of spillover at other times of the year. The dead of winter is a prime time for spookiness. December isn't just for Christmas. Hanukkah celebrates one of the miracles of the Jewish faith, when one day's worth of oil for the temple lamps lasted for 8 days. Kwanzaa, too, gives a nod to the bright happiness of the season. Maybe we're so eager to bring light to this time of the year because it's, well, pretty bleak. Take away all the festival of lights, celebrations, whether religious or secular, and you're left with cold gray days and even colder nights. And those nights are long. For centuries, we've chosen to have celebrations around the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. There's something in our human nature that wants to fight the darkness. The book itself is a celebration of the weirdness that has swirled around the Christmas season for many centuries. Within these pages, you'll find stories to warm your heart and tales to chill you, just as effectively as a cutting December wind. You'll find creatures of Christmas folklore from ages past, monsters that will haunt your dreams far more than the dreaded phrase, batteries not included, or even the chilling some assembly required. You'll also find some fairly creepy tales that just happen to take place in the darkest, coldest part of the year. Not all Christmas ghost stories have cheerful, redemptive endings. Like a Christmas Carol. Even in Dickens' book, there's a fair amount of creep factor in the ghosts of Christmas yet to come. Not all winter ghost stories take place beside a welcoming, crackling, cozy hearth fire. We've started to embrace this chance to revisit Halloween weeks later. In 2015, the movie Krampus made $61.5 million at the box office. Recent years have also seen many commercial haunted houses realizing the potential of this out-of-season spookiness. There are now Krampus-themed haunted houses operating in Phoenix, Austin, Nashville, Denver, Green Bay, and many other cities. And yes, Krampus plays in Peoria, the haunted infirmary, in Illinois' top 10 rated haunt on the grounds of the Peoria State Hospital in Bartonville. It switches gears in December and welcomes Krampus to its spooky halls. Even Disneyland gets in on the fun, as the Haunted Mansion is transformed into a Nightmare Before Christmas-themed ride. Most of the haunts are simply called Krampus, A Haunted Christmas, but some use the holiday as a chance to get creative with groan-inducing holiday puns. The Fright Before Christmas, Santa's Sleigh, Jingle Hell, and A Nightmare on 34th Street are just a few of these haunt names. Chamber of Horrors in New York even lets you get your picture taken on Santa's lap, in case you're still planning your Christmas card. And for those of us who still feel warm and fuzzy around the holidays, some haunted houses offer a $3 discount for hauntgoers who bring a toy to donate to charity. Some of these stories were collected centuries ago. Some of them were told to me by the people who experienced them. All of them are true, in the sense that they held truth for the people who were there, and who later shared them with others. They were true at the time, and that's good enough for me. That is my goal in writing this book, to share all of these marvelous, terrifying, wondrous stories with you. The book is divided into several sections, for your reading pleasure. God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen takes a look at the Victorians and their passion for ghost stories at Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas, or else. Introduces some bizarre Christmas customs and looks at the raucous side of the season as it used to be celebrated. He Sees You When You're Sleeping introduces the monsters and demons of Christmas in the bleak midwinter, describes unsettling events that unfolded in the coldest, darkest part of the year. The Darkest Midnight in December is a look at tragedies that happen to take place in that month. 'Tis the Season is a collection of ghost stories all through the month of December. And It Came Upon a Midnight Clear gathers ghost stories that happened on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. So decorate the tree, whip up some eggnog, hang the stockings, and don't forget to check under the bed. Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. I'm sorry, all a good fright, my bad. Okay, so here we go. And to let you know that I do have permission from the author and the publisher to be reading this book, so it's all clear. So let's get on with this. The Spirit of Christmas. The Spirits of Christmas, the darkness of the holidays. God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, the Victorians. So why tell ghost stories at Christmas? That ship sailed on November 1st, didn't it? Ho, 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 not so fast. Take away the brightly colored lights, the promise of a full stocking, and the breakneck shopping frenzy, and you have what is admittedly a very bleak time of year. December marks the turning of the year, the shortest days and the longest nights. For centuries, it was the perfect time to curl up with a good ghost story. In 1891, in the introduction of an anthology of Christmas ghost stories entitled Told After Supper, see, we read that last week, you guys, the British writer Jerome K. Jerome wrote, "Whenever 5 or 6 English-speaking people meet round a fire around Christmas Eve, they start telling each other ghost stories. Nothing satisfies us on Christmas Eve but to hear each other tell authentic anecdotes about specters. Part of this hunger for a tale of ghostly revenants came simply from the time of year Christmas is celebrated. This went back centuries, long before the Victorian era. The Puritan leader, Oliver Cromwell, was also the Lord Protector of England, which meant that he got to make the rules for a while. In the mid-1600s, Cromwell tried hard to abolish the celebration of Christmas altogether. After all, he argued, nowhere in the Bible does it expressly say that Christ's birthday is on December 25th. As a matter of fact, shepherds in the Holy Land watch over their flocks by night in the springtime, April or early May. It wasn't until the 4th century that Pope Julius I fixed December 25th as the date to celebrate the birth of Christ. The Protestants also thought that celebrating Christmas smacked of Catholicism, which they were eager to abolish. So Christmas was a non-starter for quite a few centuries in England, unless you were in the Catholic minority. December 25th as the date for Christmas was not an arbitrary choice for the early Christians. Both Yule and Sol Invictus, the festival of the unconquered sun, commemorated the winter solstice. The symbolic connotations of these holidays coincided with the Christians' belief that the Son of God had come to the world. Pope Julius I simply co-opted dates that were already significant to pagan Romans and Northern Europeans. Of course, this meant that the raucous pagan celebrations, the Saturnalia parties, and the topsy-turvy turnarounds got brought into early Christmas celebrations too. The winter solstice was also considered to be the spookier of the two solstices. Rather than long hours of daylight and a short night, the winter solstice marked the turning of the year with the shortest day and the longest night. The increased hours of darkness meant, of course, that spooks and monsters and things that go bump had a lot more time to roam the earth during the winter months. It brought to mind the death of the sun and the thinning of the veil between worlds. The Victorian Christmas celebration, then, which already made heavy use of pagan symbols like Yule logs, holly leaves, and even Father Christmas, also embraced the holiday-nodding acquaintance with the supernatural. This helped to create one of the Victorian era's most enduring holiday traditions, the Christmas ghost story. Even Christmas games of the period held an element of terror. The popular game, Snapdragon, involved putting raisins, plums, or almonds in a bowl of brandy and then setting the brandy on fire. Players tried to snatch a raisin out of the flaming bowl and pop it into their mouth to extinguish it. Another game had the players attempting to bite apples which were tied to one end of a stick. The other end had a lighted candle stuck to it. The phrase, "Don't try this at home, kids," hadn't been invented yet. Other games smacked of sadomasochism. The game of hot cockles involved putting your head in someone's lap while trying to guess who was hitting you from behind. The kneeler, who was it, put their hand behind their back, palm up. The other players took turns smacking the palm in an anonymous low five. Shoeing the wild mare was a similar guessing game, which involved a whack on the foot. But after the brandy's blue flames had died down, after the Christmas goose was picked down to the bones, after the last candle had guttered to a sullen yellow glow, then, came the ghost stories. And what stories they were! The Kit Bag, 1908, by Algernon Blackwood, tells of a man packing a haunted suitcase on Christmas Eve in preparation for an overseas journey. Mrs. J.H. Riddle wrote A Strange Christmas Game in 1863 about a brother and sister who spent Christmas in a haunted house and witnessed a ghostly reenactment of a murder. And speaking of games, Smee by A.M. Barrage, 1931, is a real spine-tingler. A house full of partiers are playing hide-and-seek on Christmas Eve in a big old rambling country house, when they discover during the game that an extra player has snuck in and joined them. All these tales and more can be enjoyed at www.gothicHorrorStories.com. One of the most famous Christmas-themed ghost stories is another tale of hide-and-seek. This one quite a bit more gruesome than the atmospherically chilling Smee. This story is sometimes presented as a true ghost tale, but it has been through so many incarnations that it should more truly be considered an urban legend. The following is just one half of a dozen versions of the story. The story is set sometimes at Bramshill House in Hampshire, England. Okay? Originally built in the 1600s, it was renovated extensively over the centuries. The current manor house was once owned by Sir John Cope, and it is his daughter, Anne, whose ghost now haunts the mansion. Anne was married on Christmas Day. During the wedding celebration, Anne suggested the guests all play a game of hide and seek. The guests all scattered throughout the huge country home. Anne scampered to a little used part of the manor house, where, to her delight, she found a large oak chest. She climbed inside and pulled the lid down on top of herself. It was a good hiding place. Much too good. 50 years later, some unsuspecting Cope descendant opened the ornately carved chest and got a horrifying surprise. Anne's mummified remains were still dressed in her wedding gown. Scratch marks on the inside of the lid were a gruesome testimony to her final hours. In 1953, Bramshill House was sold out of the family and turned into a police training center. Many cadets, so the story goes, have seen a lady dressed in a long white gown drifting around the mansion or have caught whiffs of the sweet scent of her wedding bouquet. Sure, it's an urban legend of sorts, but it's also kind of a cool story. And as urban legends go, this one has staying power. Its origins can be traced back even to before the Victorian era. The story can be found in a poem by Thomas Haynes Bailey, 1797 to 1830, sometimes called The Ballad of the Mistletoe Bride. The poem and the story illustrate the technique of setting a tragic story at Christmas. Its juxtaposition of a joyful time of year and a joyous occasion, being a wedding, with the main character's horrifying final moments, being buried alive. The Victorians just loved this stuff. As far back as Shakespeare's time, Christmas was associated with wandering spirits. In Hamlet, the guarded Marcellus tries to explain the sudden disappearance of Hamlet's father's ghost. Some say that ever against that season comes, wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated, the bird of dawning singeth all night long, and then, they say, no spirit dare stirs abroad. The nights are wholesome, then no planets strike, no fairy takes, nor witch hath power to charm. So hallowed and gracious is the time. Maybe Marcellus was doing his own version of whistling past the graveyard or hiding under the covers so that the ghost can't get him. But this bit of ghost lore tells us a lot about the Victorian attitude of later years towards spirits. There were spirits aplenty running around Victorian England, but according to the lore, Christmas Eve was the one night of the year when ghosts were not allowed to roam the earth. Maybe that's why the Victorians felt so safe telling spooky tales on that night. They could talk about ghosts all they wanted to, with no fear of drawing unwanted attention from the spirit world. Another theory of the Victorian fondness for ghost stories is that people of the era were just glad to have a space, well-lit place to tell those stories. The Industrial Revolution of the late 18th and early 19th centuries marked a move towards living in the big cities. As England's population moved into the urban areas, nature and the darkness found thereafter, the sun went down, became unfamiliar and frightening. People of the early 19th century had only recently gotten used to the luxury of having dependable sources of light after nightfall. Gas lighting was invented in the 1790s, and gas lighting the streets and buildings began in the early 1800s. Most streets in London were lit by gas lamps as early as 1816. But gas as a means of lighting homes was distrusted for the first 50 years or so. There's also a theory about gas fixtures themselves, and that they contributed to the epidemic of Victorian ghost stories. There's a reason the bright interior decorating of the Georgian period, all that beautiful white and gold decor, turned dark and gloomy in the Victorian age. Dark Victorian wallpaper hid soot better. Gas fixtures began to show up in city homes and manor houses in the mid-19th century, and sometimes they leaked gas and tainted the air with noxious fumes. A tightly laced corset was only one reason for a well-bred Victorian lady to faint. Another reason was lack of oxygen in gas-lit parlors. There's a theory in paranormal circles that gas leaks sometimes lead to hallucinations or wispy figures or shadows seen out of the corner of the eye. This would go far towards explaining the explosion of ghost sightings in the Victorian era. Whether or not 19th century ghosts were the product of leaky gas fixtures, we have the Victorians to thank for a wealth of supernatural themed literature. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw countless Christmas gift books published that were entirely devoted to ghost stories. These weren't cheap dime novels either. These were classy, upscale publications of quality design and prestigious writing. Contributors to these gift books and annually published anthologies included Edgar Allan Poe, Mary Shelley, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Rudyard Kipling. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle actually introduced the character of Sherlock Holmes in a story of Christmas. But the granddaddy of all Christmas ghost stories, of course, A Christmas Carol. This most beloved of Dickens's works was written for a most unsentimental reason. The author had bills to pay. In October 1843, Charles Dickens was hurting for money. He got married in 1836, and he and his wife had already produced 4 children, with number 5 on the way. Dickens had an almost pathological horror of being in debt. His father had been thrown into debtor's prison when Charles was 12 years old. The grown-up Charles Dickens refused, above all else, to put his own family through such shame and degradation. He needed a project to raise some fast cash. He had an idea for a story of a miserly old curmudgeon whose grumpy outlook on life is changed by visits from 3 spirits. Dickens was actually recycling material he had already written. In the Pickwick Papers, Dickens wrote The Story of the Goblins Who Stole a Sexton. This told the story of Gabriel Grubb. And isn't that just the perfect name for a gravedigger? A drunken sexton who chooses to spend Christmas Eve digging a grave instead of celebrating the holiday. I suppose someone's got to do it, but hey, Christmas is Christmas. Grubb is dragged off by goblins and has a change of heart after the Goblin King shows him a series of visions that prove his life is worth living, after all. Dickens took this theme and embroidered it. Instead of visions, Ebenezer Scrooge received actual visits from ghosts. First, his late partner, Jacob Marley, then the spirits of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas yet to come. For good measure, Dickens tossed in a ridiculously sentimental subplot involving Tiny Tim, Cratchit, the kind of sickly poor child the Victorians loved to weep over. He wrote the book in a fever of production. It was on his publisher's desk in less than 6 weeks. And the gamble paid off big time. A Christmas Carol was released on December 19th, 1843. The original print run of 6,000 copies sold out within 3 days. Since then, it has never been out of print. Taking on a life far beyond the printed page, it has been produced as a play, a musical, and many movies. The earliest being a 1908 version by Thomas Edison. Dickens kept up with his fashion of telling ghost stories at Christmas time. Until his death in 1870, Dickens produced a number of Christmas annuals and invited other writers to contribute to these anthologies. With the success of A Christmas Carol, Dickens could pay off the debt that had led to its creation. Dickens was set for life. In fact, he was able to leave both his wife, from whom he had separated in 1858, and his mistress, an actress he met in 1857, independently wealthy for the rest of their lives. Not too shabby. Incidentally, it seems that Charles Dickens has joined the cast of spirits who populate his best-known work. In life, he spent time at the Omni Parker House Hotel in 1867 and 68, while touring the United States giving readings of his works. He could be heard in his room practicing his delivery late into the night. In modern times, guests who stayed at the Dickens suite reported seeing the ghostly image of the great actor himself in the large mirror that used to hang in the room. The phantom would appear in the mirror, pacing back and forth, reading A Christmas Carol out loud. When spoken to, the ghost would vanish. Many hotel guests also reported that the elevator would stop on the 3rd floor of the hotel, even though no one had pressed that button. Was it the ghost of Dickens heading back to his room? The haunted mirror spent many years hanging on the wall at the hotel until it was moved a few blocks away to the Tremont Temple Baptist Church. It now hangs on the 2nd floor at the very end of the hallway. It wasn't only famous writers who contributed stories to these Christmas annuals. Folks who didn't have a literary reputation to uphold, but who had an interesting tale to tell, often shared their experiences with the magazines. A Major McGregor shared his tale with Real Ghost Stories, which was the celebrated Christmas edition of the Review of Reviews. At the end of 1871, the Major, went to Ireland to visit a relative who lived in Dublin. In January 1872, this relative's husband fell ill. The Major sat up with the sick man for several nights, until it seemed a corner had been turned. On that night, the Major felt confident about leaving the patient to sleep alone, and he himself went to the guest room for some much-needed rest. He told the footman to wake him if the patient suddenly took a turn for the worse. Then he went to bed. The Major was awakened some time later by someone giving him a push on the shoulder. He came awake immediately and said, "Is there anything wrong?" He got no answer. Just another push. The Major, thinking it was the footman, got annoyed and snapped, "Can you not speak, man, and tell me if there is anything wrong?" His visitor stayed silent. The Major, not wanting another shove on the shoulder, made a grab in the darkness and caught a human hand, warm, plump, and soft. Obviously not the hand of the footman. The Major asked, "Who are you?" but again got no answer. He tried to pull the person towards him, but he couldn't. "I will know who you are," the Major cried. He held the stranger's hand tightly in his right hand and explored the arm with his left hand. He felt a wrist and an arm enclosed in a tight-fitting sleeve of some heavy winter fabric, with a linen cuff. But when he felt up past the elbow, the arm just stopped. The Major was seriously freaked out by this, and dropped the hand he was holding. The clock struck 2, and the Major knew there would be no more sleep for him that night. The next morning, the Major told the household what had happened. The servants of the house had a ready explanation. It must have been the master's old Aunt Betty, who lived in the upper part of the house for many years, and who had died at a very great age over 50 years before. Not old Christmas ghost stories were publicized in magazines. Many families had their own collections that were bought out and brought out to be enjoyed and added to year after year. One of the most celebrated personal collections was written by Lord Halifax, published in 1936. It is still available today. His son wrote years later about his fond memories of Christmas. "As long as I can remember, my father's ghost book was one of the most distinctive associations of Hickleton as the family home. He kept it always with great care himself, from time to time making additions to it in his own handwriting, and bringing it out on special occasions, such as Christmas, to read some of the particular favorites aloud before we all went to bed. I well recollect my mother protesting, although I think almost inevitably to no effect, against the children being frightened too much. The victims themselves, fascinated and spellbound by a sense of delicious terror, never failed to ask for more. I myself would have been right at home with the Halifax children. So here, in the spirit of Christmas and of the grand old tradition of the season, I offer this collection of true ghost stories. I hope it brings you just as much wonder and terror as Lord Halifax's stories brought to his children. We wish you a Merry Christmas, or else bizarre Christmas traditions. Double tap that screen. Let's see how many we can get today before we leave. I'm just looking at this. Okay. All right. Here we go. Christmas hasn't always been Tiny Tim's saying, "God bless us, everyone." Centuries ago, it was more a matter of every man for himself. It was a time of carousing, of turning the social order of things upside down. It was, in short, a time for shenanigans. Even in modern days, we still cling to a cozy Victorian ideal of the holidays, say Christmas, and most of us will reflexively think of family gathered around a colorful lit tree, a tree with presents piled underneath it. Whether or not that imaginary family will get along with each other without the lubricating effects of copious amounts of rum, spiked eggnog, is another matter. But before the Victorians came along and settled things down, Christmas was not quite the domestic holiday of Dickens, one-horse sleigh rides and Currier and Ives prints. Instead, it was a holiday of boisterous revelry, sort of a mashup of Halloween, New Year's Eve, and Mardi Gras. The Romans started the custom of giving gifts as solstice celebration. Winter solstice, the shortest day and the longest night of the year, comes from the Latin for the sun stands still, although the winter solstice was called bruma, to distinguish it from... Here we go. Foreign words, guys. I can't even say this. I'm just going to... Okay, the summer solstice. I'll butcher it. Saturnalia and Calendai were both well-loved Roman holidays. At Saturnalia, slaves were allowed to run the run of the house, and masters were obliged to serve them. And Calendae marked new beginnings. The 4th century writer Libanius had this to say about the celebrations. The feast of the Calendae is honored as far as the Roman Empire stretches. Everywhere is singing and feasting. The rich enjoy luxury, but the poor also set better food than usual upon their tables. The desire to spend money grips everybody. People are not merely bountiful to themselves, but to their fellow humans. A stream of presents pours itself out on all sides. The Calendae bring all work to a halt and allow humans to surrender themselves to pure pleasure. Saturnalia was just one of the many holidays that made up the Roman calendar, but it was one of the biggest. The lower classes looked forward to the role reversal that came at the turning of the year. Household slaves, especially, jumped at the chance to be in charge for a while, to be served by their master and mistress. Even after the fall of the Roman Empire, this role reversal at Christmas time continued to be one of the few perks enjoyed by the lower classes. The custom of wassailing, or going door to door to beg for alms, began way back in the early Middle Ages. The practice continued all through the Middle Ages as a way to keep the social and political order stable. You think giving the girl who cuts your hair an extra tip at Christmas is a new thing? Think again. In medieval times, tradesmen would ask their customers for gifts or largesse at the holidays. And sometimes they would threaten retribution if refused. A morning newspaper chucked under a hedge instead of being delivered to your welcome mat is one thing. To have someone responsible for guarding your house slack off or actively invite thugs to ransack your home while they stand by watching is something else altogether. This was a problem as far back as 1419 England, when the Corporation of London ordered the servants of city officers to stop the custom of asking for Christmas offerings from victualling trades, sometimes with menaces if refused. So the lower classes were discouraged from wassailing. That didn't stop them. Even the practice of caroling was frowned upon by the upper classes, both in England and later in America. Through colonial times up into the early 19th century, caroling was not the innocent, light-hearted practice we think of today. Carolers of yesteryear were not content to stand outside in the cold and sing in the faint hope of getting a mug of hot cocoa and a cookie. Quite the opposite. In fact, old-time carolers were a rowdy, often destructive bunch. Consider the lyrics to "We Wish You a Merry Christmas. Now bring us a figgy pudding. And bring it right here. We won't go until we get some, so bring it right here." We sing these lyrics without a second thought. But when that song was written, the singers were a lot more aggressive in their demands. They weren't kidding about it. Imagine that you are someone fairly high up on the social ladder, either in England or in one of the big American cities in Philadelphia, Boston, someplace like that. You're relaxing with your family on Christmas Eve. You'll wait until New Year's to exchange gifts, because that's a great way to acknowledge fresh beginnings. For now, you're content to enjoy some quiet time with your loved ones, but you keep one ear cocked for trouble. And there it is, a pounding on the door. The maid hurries to open it, fearing it will break under the fists of the drunken hooligans. Your house clearly isn't their first stop of the evening. A half-dozen thugs swagger in your front parlor, their boots tracking snow and mud under your carpet. One of them, clearly the leader, calls himself the Lord of Misrule. He yells at you to bring out several bottles of your best wine and plenty of good food, cake, especially cake if you have it. And he knows you do. The rowdies spend an hour or so swigging claret and mashing cake crumbs into the doilies. But what can you do? You can't tell them to leave. It's tradition. They finally leave, and you breathe a sigh of relief. You're out a couple of bucks, since they demanded money too, and your parlor is trashed. But they've gone. That's over with, until the next bunch shows up. It's going to be a long holiday season. It's not too much of a stretch to say that Clement Seymour, with his poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, single-handedly turned society's perception of Christmas 180 degrees. With this poem, better known by the first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas," more completely upended the perception of Christmas as a time of riotous misrule. Instead, he introduced the character of St. Nicholas as the polar opposite of the Lord of Misrule. Instead of a bunch of rowdy young men bursting into the house uninvited, one man, solo, comes into the house. He hasn't been invited in either, but he comes in silently, without the boisterous good cheer of the wassailers, a good cheer that could turn ugly in a moment. St. Nicholas is obviously a member of a lower working man class. He holds the stump of a pipe clenched in his teeth, which was an affection of the laboring class. Dandies smoked piped with long stems, where working men preferred to snap their pipe stems off short. Also, he opens up a peddler's pack, but he poses no threat to the household. As a matter of fact, St. Nicholas displays his own largesse. Instead of demanding gifts from the narrator, fine food and liquor, presents of, money, St. Nicholas leaves gifts for the household. And most importantly, instead of threatening the narrator, we won't go until we get some, St. Nicholas expressly lets the narrator know he has nothing to fear. His appearance and behavior, although startling, are absolutely non-threatening. At about the same time Clement Moore published A Visit from St. Nicholas in 1822, society's opinion was turning against public displays of drunken rowdiness at Christmas. It was around this time that people began to buy Christmas presents for each other and for their children, rather than making them. Although, even then, a handmade gift, or at least a hand-finished gift, was much preferable to a completely store-bought Christmas gift. Merchants wanted to make their shops safe, appealing places, free from the unwanted attentions of drunken revelers. Instead of being reported in regular newspaper articles, accounts of rambunctious gang behavior started to show up in the police blotter section of the paper. The boorish behavior frowned upon by genteel society was quite literally marginalized, and it eventually faded. Wassailing had largely died out in England by the 1930s, even though the folks who used to practice the obsolete custom were still alive and well. Social programs by them were helpful enough that the poor no longer needed to beg even at Christmas time. By the 1970s, though, groups in the east and west of England started up again, singing traditional wassailing carols and offering drinks of beer or cider from the wassail bowl. These groups do collect money in exchange for their caroling, but now the money raised is donated to charity. One of the most puzzling, to modern eyes, grotesque example of a Christmas ritual reversal is the English custom of the hunting, killing, and displaying of wrens. Wrens are the smallest bird native to Europe, and killing one has for centuries been regarded as a cowardly act, sure to bring bad luck down on the perpetrator. This belief goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks and Romans. The early medieval Irish writer, Cormac of Cashel, said that the wren got its old Irish name, dreen, from druin, or druid bird. The ancient Irish used the wren for fortune-telling, but by the 17th century, the Irish were killing wrens at Christmas. This was also a custom in the British Isles and in the south of France. Teenage boys would carry a holly bush with bunches of dead birds and colorful ribbons tied to it from house to house, displaying their grisly trophies and asking, and asking for money. Later, the dead bird was carried in a box, and the wren boys would put on small skits or mock combats for the entertainment of their audiences. This custom continued through the 18th and 19th centuries. Most of the time, the tiny corpse was carried around and displayed on a ribbon-bedecked bier. But in England, by the 19th century, the hunters had switched to putting the wrens alive into a box. The box, too, was festively decorated, with colored paper of ribbons hung from the top, 2 candles at the sides, and glass windows on either side so the captive birds could be viewed. This box was slung between 2 poles and carried around to accompany the carolers. This method of capturing the birds alive took more skill and meant that the birds could be released, safe and sound, after Christmas. Wren hunting, along with caroling and wassailing, was one of several ritual reversals carried on by working-class people in the 17th through 19th centuries. Much earlier than that, though, members of higher social classes were getting up to their own Christmas shenanigans. And some took it, a little too far. Most of the records we have of the medieval period in Europe come down to us from the church, and as priests and monks were generally the record keepers of the time. By the 12th century, some of the clergy in France had developed a Christmas celebration that evoked the pagan merrymaking of ancient Saturnalia. They called it the Feast of Fools, or butts. I can't say that word. Okay, we're going to say butts, or subdeacons. And it spread rapidly from France into Flanders and then to England. The point of this, originally, was for the higher-ranking clergy to practice humility by letting the lower orders lead the worship services at New Year's. Soon, though, it evolved into a general Christmas-time celebration, with the rites being changed to suit the burlesque revelry. As early as 1236 and 1238, Robert Grosseteste, Bishop of Lincoln, had to issue an edict forbidding his clergy to completely upend the order of worship. They were pretending to worship demons. In 1333, John de Grandison, Bishop of Exeter, began a 30-year campaign to abolish the Feast of Fools at his cathedral. Apparently, the lower clergy talked the choir boys into throwing mud at each other during services on 3 holy days after Christmas. The congregation loved it. They dissolved into disorderly laughter and illicit mirth. But the bishop was not amused. By the early 15th century, the practice was no longer tolerated. There was, however, a much more endearing tradition, the choosing of the boy bishop. In the early 10th century, in Germany, the junior clergy and assistants of the cathedrals were recognized and honored by being allowed to hold procession on the 3 holy days after Christmas. Deacons on St. Stephen's Day, priests on St. John's Day, and choir boys on the Feast of the Holy Innocents, the children slaughtered by Herod's men in their search for the infant Jesus. This spread quickly to France and England and remained a custom throughout the Middle Ages. In the 12th century, the cult of St. Nicholas of Myra, patron saint of children, became popular in Western Europe, and this reinforced the popularity of the tradition of the Feast of Boys. The boy bishop was chosen by the choir boys, being one of them. He had to be good-looking with a fine singing voice. The boy bishop was dressed in a jeweled mitre and velvet vestments, embroidered with gold. He and his retinue paraded around the town collecting alms in return for singing at monasteries, convents, and the houses of nobles. Sometimes the money collected was donated to the boys' school. In other areas, the boy was allowed to keep whatever money was left after the cost of providing a large supper for his mates on the feast day of the Holy Innocents. As ritual reversals went, the choosing of the boy bishop to preside over the services was pretty low-key. It was easier for the clergy in charge to control the boys and regulate their celebrations, as opposed to the rowdiness of the adult tradesmen. Plus, this custom was less of a reversal and more of a reaffirmation of Christ's teaching of the special relationship of children to the kingdom of heaven. Next chapter. He sees you when you're sleeping. Creepy characters of Christmas. I'm going to go another 15 minutes. We're going to go more. I'm going to go till 5:10 because that's when we started. So that'll be 6:10 Pacific. So I will stop at some point, okay? But we'll continue with this. It gets creepier, guys. It gets really creepy, trust me. As you lie there, snug in your bed, with sugar plums dancing a conga line in your imagination, keep in mind that Santa Claus isn't the only mythical figure that might be sliding down your chimney and creeping around under your tree in search of milk and cookies. There are plenty of reasons to be afraid of the dark in the deepest part of the winter. Let's meet the monsters of Christmas. And here we go, you guys. Krampus, the demon of Christmas. Krampus is perhaps the most familiar of the Christmas monsters, creatures that make the Grinch look as cuddly as Rudolph. In recent years, he's become the grand old man of alternative Christmas celebrations. Krampus is a demonic-looking figure from Germanic folklore. He's got black skin covered with short black fur, a long, lolling red tongue, and one cloven hoof and one human foot. He's half demon and half goat, and he revels in punishing children who've landed themselves on Santa's naughty list. Krampus sometimes travels with St. Nicholas to dole out punishments, and sometimes he just shows up to take matters into his own hands. Krampus is invariably terrifying, as befits a demon. He wields nice whippy birch branches with which to beat naughty children. Sometimes he uses rusty chains for the beatings. He also carries a sack for abducting. Again, do not turn me into the internet police. This is a story about Krampus. You know, it's only a book, kids, okay? He also carries a sack for abducting the worst offenders. These reprobates are either carried off to hell, or Krampus snarfs them down for dinner. To get on his good side, some people leave out offerings at Christmas time. Santa likes milk and cookies. Krampus prefers schnapps. Smart guy. In some homes, Krampus leaves a bundle of twigs painted gold, which is hung up in the house as a reminder to children to behave. Krampus is feted on, oh boy, here we go, Krampusnacht. Okay, Krampusnacht, December 5th, which is the eve of St. Nicholas Day. Krampusnacht is celebrated in parts of Europe and, increasingly, parts of America, with parades and parties. La Befana, Santa's tipsy other half. Move over, Mrs. Claus. La Befana is southern Italy's answer to Santa. The legend of the Christmas witch says that the three wise men stopped at her cottage to ask for directions to Bethlehem. Being in southern Italy, they were woefully off course. La Befana had the prettiest, cleanest, best-kept house in the village, and she was famed for her generous hospitality. She invited the Magi to spend the night at her cottage. Thrilled with the kind invitation, the wise men accepted. The next morning they invited La Befana to come with them in their search for the Christ child. La Befana begged off, saying she had far too much housework to do. Houses don't clean themselves, you know. A few days after the wise men left, La Befana reconsidered their offer and decided that yes, she might like to witness the birth of baby Jesus. Unfortunately, she had forgotten to ask where the wise men were headed. Ever since then, she has wandered the planet searching for Bethlehem, leaving toys for good children and coal, onions, and garlic for naughty ones. There is another darker origin story for La Befana. In this version, she's a mother who had been driven mad by the death of her only son. In her delirium of grief, she heard the story of the birth of Jesus and became convinced that he was the reincarnation of her lost son. She left home and searched for him. After months of looking, La Befana found the Holy Family and gave baby Jesus all of her late son's possessions. In return, Jesus blessed La Befana and made her the honorary mother of every child in Italy. Now, her grief healed, La Befana travels the country, giving gifts to children during the Christmas season. Just like Santa Claus, La Befana enjoys a snack when she is on her rounds, with a sack full of goodies. But, instead of milk and cookies, she prefers a bottle of wine and boiled sausages with a side of broccoli. Although La Befana, like Santa, is a jolly sort, there is one thing you've got to remember, and that is that she doesn't like to be seen. If you catch her making her visit to your house on Christmas Eve, don't make eye contact with her, or she'll smack you in the face with her witch's broom. All right? Frau Perchta, another witch, with an unpleasant M.O. Frau Perchta, a character found in Germany and Austria, may be based on an ancient alpine nature goddess. She can appear as a beautiful young woman or as an old crone. Whatever her appearance, she can always be identified by the fact that one of her feet is a goose or swan foot. She hounds out both rewards and punishments during the 12 days of Christmas, December 25th to January 6th. Good children can expect to get a few coins from her, but lazy folks, or people who disrespect her feast day by eating something other than the prescribed foods of fish or gruel, are severely punished. While she does have a bit in common with La Befana, they're both old women who leave presents for kids. Frau Perchta has a vicious streak. Yes, she rewards the virtuous, but she also has a unique way of punishing the sinful. She rips out, okay guys, remember this, no internet police, all right, everybody? She rips out their internal organs and replaces them with big handfuls of rocks and straw or rotting garbage. All right? These are legends. Do not get upset. Get your panties in a bunch. Saint Lucia, patron saint of the poor and blind. In Scandinavian tradition, the Christmas season is welcomed on St. Lucy's Day, December 13th. Young girls, usually the oldest daughter in the family, wake the family members with a breakfast of loose cutter. Hopefully I said that right. It's currant-filled buns made golden and fragrant with saffron. The girl serves this treat to the family while wearing a crown made of holly surmounted by several lit candles. St. Lucy's Day is yet another holiday observance that emphasizes the triumph of light over darkness. In the Julian calendar, the winter solstice fell on December 13th, her feast days. St. Lucy is the Catholic patron saint of the poor and blind, and for good reason. Lucia lived in Sicily in the late 3rd century A.D., a devout Christian. She longed for a life of prayerful chastity, but she faced an arranged marriage. Her husband-to-be happened to compliment Lucia's beautiful eyes, so she gouged them out and sent them to him, along with a note of pleading for him to take what he most admired about her, and to leave the rest of her alone. Lucia was martyred in 303 AD, but Lucia has a dark side too. In legend, Lucia was identified with Adam's first wife. She dumped Adam and took the devil as her lover, spawning a host of demon children. On her feast night, the longest night of the year, animals gained the power of speech, and her infernal children were free to roam the earth. The next morning, people celebrated with a feast of breakfast buns, saffron yellow, to acknowledge the victory of the sun rising on another day. Cool. Belsnickel. Remember Belsnickel was in the Kurt Russell Santa movie. Belsnickel necht Ruprecht. Oh boy. Ruklaas, Zwarte Piet, the Dark Helpers. Okay. Belsnickel is a character from southwestern German folklore who crossed the Atlantic and now serves in Pennsylvania. Dutch customs. He makes his rounds dressed in tattered clothes and raggedy furs. He visits children before Christmas as a reminder of what the season has in store for them. Like Santa Claus and Krampus combined, he carries candy to reward good children and a switch to whip bad children. In modern times, Belsnickel has mellowed and uses his whip only to make noise and remind kids that they still have time to clean up their act before Christmas. Sort of a warning shot off the bow technique. Belsnickel might have gotten his name from the German Belsen, to beat or wallop, and nickel for St. Nicholas. Next, Rupert, Zwarte Piet, and Ruklaas are underlings of Belsnickel and of St. Nicholas. These characters are all the heavies. Their job is to punish the bad kids while letting St. Nicholas or Belsnickel reward good children with gifts. Necht, Ruprecht, Servant Rupert, Ruklaas, Rough Nicholas, and Zwarte Piet, Black Peter, all made their first appearances in a German play in 1668. This was around the time of the Protestant Reformation, and the times they were a-changin'. They were called into existence as the secular dark helpers of Christendom, the infant Jesus, then responsible for the delivery of presents. Since the gentle image of the angelic Christ child cannot be expected to frighten children into good behavior, menacing characters carrying switches were just the ticket. Hans Trapp, Monsters Eat Whiny Children. Hailing from the Alsace-Lorraine region of France, Hans Trapp was another anti-Santa, but instead of just being invented by grown-ups to scare kids into good behavior, legend says that Hans Trapp was a real man. As in the best fairy tales, he was a rich, greedy, evil guy. He ran afoul of the Catholic Church somehow and was excommunicated and exiled to the forest. He would dress in raggedy scarecrow clothes and would snatch unwary children, drag them to his cave deep in the woods, unalive them, and eat them. Nice guy. One dark and stormy night, he was in the middle of a cannibalistic child abduction, and he was struck by lightning and killed in the act. Presumably, his evil nature survived him to terrorize children for centuries afterward. Pete Fouettard. That's what it says, Fouettard, Father Whipper. Pete Fouettard is a French version of Hans Trapp, also purportedly based on a historical figure. He is said to have been, in life, an evil butcher who craved the flesh of children to eat. According to the legend, 3 boys from rich families were on their way to a religious boarding school. While they stopped, Pierre Fouettard's inn for the night. He lured the 3 boys into his butcher shop, where he unalived them, chopped them up, and salted them down. You guys know what happened after that. Okay, the theme of stranger danger is taken to Brothers Grimm's extremes in these cheerful holiday stories. No kidding. St. Nicholas appeared in the butcher shop, resurrected the boys, and took Pierre Fouettard into his custody. The butcher became St. Nicholas's servant and, like Krampus and Zwarte Piet, was allowed to dole out punishment to children who misbehaved. Perchton, Genderbender. Perchton is a dual-gendered spirit who comes out during the 12 days of Christmas. Beautiful Perchton is female. She gives gifts and brings good luck. Ugly Perchton is male and punishes the sinful. The Yule Lads and Gryla. Demonic dwarves. The Yule Lads are 13 Icelandic trolls. They each have a name that matches their distinct personality, sort of like a baker's dozen of the 7 dwarves. Some of the Yule Lads include Spoon Licker, Pot Scraper, Door Sniffer, Window Peeper, and Sausage Swiper. In ancient times, they stole things and generally raised havoc and caused trouble for humans around Christmas. Yet again, they were used to scare children into good behavior. Later, though, Iceland borrowed the Norwegian Julianese, Norway's version of Santa Claus, who brought gifts to good children. The two traditions became mingled, until the formerly devilish Yule Lads became kind enough to leave gifts in the shoes that good children left out for them. All 13 of the Yule Lads answer to Gryla, who is their mother. In Icelandic legend, she is an ogress who kidnaps, cooks, and eats children who don't obey their parents. She became associated with Christmas in the 17th century when she was assigned to be the mother of the Yule Lads. According to legend, Gryla has 3 heads with 3 icy blue eyes in each head. She has horribly long fingernails that grow in grotesque claw-like curves and horns like a goat. Her earlobes dangle down to her shoulders. She has a beard on her chin that looks like a mass of tangled knotted yarn. She had 3 different husbands and 72 children, all of whom caused trouble for humans, ranging from harmless mischief to murder. As if the household wasn't crowded enough, the Yule Cat also lives as Gryla. Jola Katurin, the Christmas cat. That was also, if you guys know it, that was also in the that movie with Kurt Russell as well. Those Christmas movies. The Yule Cat is not a cuddly ball of calico fluff with a red bow around his neck, and as his name might suggest. In fact, his main job is to eat you. In Icelandic tradition, those who finished their work on time got new clothes for Christmas, and lazy folks lost out. To scare children into doing their chores, parents would tell them that the Yule Cat could tell at a glance which children were lazy and needed to be eaten. They were the kids who didn't have at least one new item of clothing for Christmas. Suddenly, that itchy hand-knitted sweater from your great-aunt, Ruth, isn't looking too bad, is it? And one more before we close tonight. Joel Bach, the Christmas Goat. On Scandinavian-themed Christmas trees, even today, you might see a straw figure of a 4-legged creature hanging from a branch, a red ribbon around its neck, curved horns sweeping proudly over its head. This is a Christmas goat, and it serves now as a good luck decoration, like the other creatures in our Christmas Rogues Gallery, though the Jewel Block has followed a long and winding road to the branches of the Christmas tree. The Jewel Block started out 1,000 years ago as a reference to Thor and his 2 pet goats. Gaptooth and Tooth Grinder were the names of the goats. Thor was Peter's worst nightmare. Every night he would slaughter his goats for the warrior's feast in Valhalla. Then he would raise them from the dead the next day to have them around to kill for that night's feast. Thor's callous but sustainable treatment of his pets was commemorated for centuries in a Swedish folk custom called the Juloffer, or the Yule Sacrifice. This ancient midwinter celebration involved an actor dressed in skins and wearing a formidable pair of horns. He was led into the room by 2 men, who pretended to slaughter the goat while singing about it. At the end of the song, the goat jumped up, none the worse for having its throat slit. The early Christian fathers were not amused by this obviously pagan spectacle. They declared the Jewel Block to be a demon. The common people took this idea and ran with it. Tales from 17th century Sweden describe the dark and demonic Jewel Block roaming the countryside on December 25th, demanding gifts of food and frightening devout Christians. By the mid-1900s, though, both the Yule Sacrifice and the demonic Yule Goat were relics of the past. The Yule Goat became a cheerful symbol of good luck rather than a terrifying midwinter apparition. Okay, guys, that is an hour. Wow. The book's never boring. Let me move this over. Okay. I gotta mark my page, too. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I appreciate it. I know it's not our usual stuff. I'll be back tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific, to read tarot cards for you guys. I'm really excited about it. Now, at 5:30 p.m. Pacific tomorrow, for those of you that want to follow the California Haunts Radio Show, we do have our first guest of the week. His name is Fritz Zimmerman, and he's going to be talking about giants that roamed the earth and the skeletons that have been found of these giants that are kind of being hidden away from us. So he'll be with me at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. So come on over to our YouTube channel. I can't do the show on TikTok because I don't have the right key. So in order to see that, you have to go to youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. I'll try to do a TikTok video beforehand and leave you guys a link to go to. But otherwise, it's youtube.com. What do we got here? Invite. youtube.com God, you get me confused. youtube.com/@California Haunts Radio. Okay? I want to thank you guys for coming. I know it's hard for you guys to sit for an hour. Information now has to come so fast, but for the people that did stay, I want to thank you all. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. And next week, we'll continue with this book. We're just about done with this chapter of Christmas Legends. Then we're going to get into some really, really creepy stories that, some of them even gave me nightmares last year. So, so we're going to be, doing that. I want to thank you guys for coming tonight. Thank you to my moderators for coming tonight. Thank you for any gifts that may have come through. Of course, I didn't see them because I was reading. Thank you, Facebook. Thank you, YouTube. And thank you, Eve Mux. And looks like we're going to be doing Eve Mux for the regular show. We didn't have one problem tonight, so huzzah. But thank you, guys, and I'll see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific. Have a great one, everybody. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you, all the moderators, too. Thank you, guys. Okay. Okay, so here we are, and I'm going to call it a night, and I'll see you guys tomorrow, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, right here on Facebook and YouTube. And we will be talking with Fritz Zimmerman, and I'm really excited to get the first show in about a month and a half going, officially, and especially over on Facebook. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, okay? Have a great one, and bye.